Well, good morning, everyone. It is so good to be with you this morning, online, wherever you are tuning in from. We are continuing our series, The Return, right now, and I am super excited about it because, life is returning to what we might even consider normal now. The country is starting to open up. We're getting back to normal, whatever that may be. And, as a church, we are embarking on that journey as well, back to on-site services. We had our first on-site service last Sunday evening in 62 weeks, and it was amazing. It was so good to be back in the room with people, even though there are still lots of restrictions in place. It was still so good to be back in the room as we return to life as we previously knew it before this whole pandemic happened. And, with the return to life as we know it, it is so exciting, right? But it also can come with its challenges. And that's why we want to do this series, The Return. Because I don't know about you, but I personally have already started to notice the challenges of the return, particularly in my work life. The last 2 months in general practice have been the busiest of this entire pandemic, and I am tired. Why has it been so busy in this last 2 months? Well, the return to normal, restrictions are easing, and therefore patients are starting to come back in the normal way that they would do, which brings its normal frustrations that we usually have as being a GP. But there's also been an unusually high demand. So this stat is a bit mental, but GP practices in England delivered 4.8 million more appointments in March than they did in February. Almost 5 million more appointments in March compared to February. And you might think, people are starting to come, they've been away for the last year, they've kept away from the general practice, we haven't bothered our GPs, all this kind of stuff. And so now as things are getting back to normal, they're coming back. Yes, that's part of it. But apparently another statistic is that 3 million more appointments were had in March compared to 2 years ago in the same month. So the demand is significantly higher. So that's probably why I've been a bit stressed recently. So not only is the demand high, but it also feels a little bit like people are being a bit more demanding. Now, this isn't everyone, of course, and there's lots of very nice people out there, I'm sure, use your GP in a very appropriate way, but I've particularly noticed a little bit of a trend of thinking, I haven't bothered you in the last year, so I want everything now, and I want it as soon as possible. And people maybe don't appreciate the fact that there's a lot of other people we're trying to cater for and help at the same time. And so maybe there's a little bit of extra challenge within that. And I recognize that this kind of intensity and volume of contact with patients and people is chipping away at my compassion, if I'm honest. Full disclosure here this morning, I'm not holding back. I'm more irritable. People are annoying me. If I'm brutally honest, I'm judging people more. I feel like people are wasting my time. I feel like I'm not treating people as individuals like I normally would, and trying to see things from other people's perspective. And I'm just tending to see people more as a burden because of the high number of patients that we're dealing with. When this happens when you're under stress, and this happens when you're dealing with lots of people. As we return back to church life as we know it, we're going to go back to encountering more people on a regular basis. So what can that mean? More opportunity for conflict. The more people you do life with, the more potential you have to get annoyed and irritated by people, right? The more people you are around, the more people are there to potentially frustrate you. Now, I know this morning you may have tuned in to have some kind of uplifting motivational talk, but I do think we need to be prepared for this kind of thing too. Because we're human beings, and we're going, as we all get together more, we're going to have the potential for conflict. So I think, as we return to what will look like a bit more like life as we know it pre-pandemic, we need to be mindful of how we treat other people. We've looked at, in the past few weeks in this series, of how we can navigate the return to normal life personally, but I want to look at today of how we can do that collectively as a community. See, the thing is, this last 1 year plus has been crazy, hasn't it? So much has changed. People have changed. And so much has happened in people's lives. Great things have happened, which is fantastic. So many good things have happened to people in our community. We've had marriages, we've had babies being born, we've had new businesses set up and flourish, we've had people with new jobs despite the situation. New people have joined our community as well, which is incredible. And it's so good to see new faces last weekend in person. But I say that, but bad things unfortunately have happened to people too. We've had people had bereavements, serious illness, breakups, divorces, uncertain times for businesses, friendship conflicts, and people have left our church. There's a lot that has happened in other people's lives that we just don't know about because we haven't seen each other week in, week out on a regular basis. We might be surprised and maybe a little shocked at the changes in other people's lives as we return. But with that, we can then easily fall into the trap of judging others and perhaps not welcoming each other back with open arms like we originally thought we would. I can hear you all thinking at home, that won't be me, Helena. I don't judge people. I'm a good Christian. But I think we need to be honest with ourselves, and I'm speaking to myself here too, because we don't want to unintentionally fall into this trap. If you find yourself thinking, wow, some people have made some bad decisions in lockdown, that's still being a bit judgmental, isn't it? Subconsciously, that might affect how you are towards that person. You might find yourself wanting to distance yourself from some people based on how they've conducted themselves in lockdown. As I said, it's been a crazy time. So much has happened, both in individuals' lives, but also nationally, globally. We haven't been able to interact as we were designed to interact in person, and that can have a real impact negatively on our relationships. We've seen this huge polarizing of opinion on various big issues in our nation, which unfortunately will extend into our church community. Issues like the political ones, like the government, how they should have reacted to the pandemic, lockdown versus no lockdown, masks versus no masks, vaccines versus no vaccines. There will be people in our community with very different opinions on all of those things. And what about the Black Lives Matter movement? There's been conflict around this too. Some people have said we didn't do enough as a church. Other people said we did too much. There is a big variety of opinion in our community, and with that, there is a potential for conflict. Because these are huge issues that matter a lot to us as individuals and as a community, and because they matter so much to us, it can cause conflict. But then we just haven't had the right forum to be able to handle any kind of disagreement either. We've just been interacting online, which is just the worst sometimes. The risks of just doing that are so significant to our relationships because we say things via a keyboard that we would never say to someone's face. We can't sense tone when it's all written down, and that leaves so much open to interpretation and misinterpretation. We can get stuck in our own echo chambers in the last year and cancel anyone who tries to challenge our opinions. We think maybe we're trying to have a meaningful debate with someone and help challenge their opinions, but really we just want to be right and persuade other people to think the way we think. And I say that again, knowing that I am guilty of this too. So much has happened, the good, the bad, the ugly. But we need to be ready to face the changes that have happened over the last year or so in our community. Yes, we are united by a love for Jesus and his cause on this earth, but there is still a huge potential for division amongst us, and we need to be able to handle this as we all return to seeing people on site again. We need to work out how we're going to deal with issues that we may have with other people because of what they have said or done in lockdown. We need to work out how to flow together again as a community in person when we'll all probably have something we don't agree with that someone else has done. Now, if you're tuning in right now for the first time, or maybe you're relatively new to this whole church thing, firstly, I'm so pleased that you are tuning in right now. This is awesome. But I'm conscious that you might be thinking, well, I'm not really a part of that community yet, so maybe this message isn't really relevant for me. Well, I just want to say, please stick with me in this, because actually what we're going to cover today is relevant for any community, any relationships. And I hope that together we can learn a bit more about how we can deal with conflict and disagreement well. So how do we do this? How do we deal with others that we don't agree with and still maintain a unified community? How can we stand side by side or work together with those who we might have taken offense from? How can we interact with people when we don't like what they have said or done in the last year? So in order to answer these questions, I want to look at the most famous, I think, biblical return story for some inspiration, which is found in Luke 15, and it's the parable of the prodigal son. I think there are different people in this story that we can identify with, some characteristics that we can model perhaps to maybe answer these questions. You might remember this account or this story because Sam used the same scripture when he preached a few weeks ago, but we're going to look at it from a different perspective today. So here we go. Luke 15. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. It's pretty bold, isn't it, to ask? Yeah, I know, Dad, I know you're not dead yet, but you're going to give me half of this anyway. Can I have it now? Anyway, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. No investment, just squandered it. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. That is a low point. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." And this is the best bit. "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and I've sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all of these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered all your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him?' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He is lost and is found.'" So, here we have a story of a guy who makes bad decisions. He says and does regrettable things that hurt other people and hurt himself. And then he comes home to, let's say, a mixed welcome. So we want to look at the 3 different perspectives in this story that we might potentially identify with. And the first one is the prodigal son. He's the mistake maker, right? He clearly made some major ill-advised life decisions. And he's the epitome of wanting it all now, no matter the consequence. He didn't have any patience. He has no concept of delayed gratification. And I'm sure we can identify with that. We've all had times like that, when we've been tempted to do something right now, even though we know it's going to be bad for us in a long time, but it's just so tempting now. I've definitely felt that way about desserts on a regular basis. So he took leave of his senses, he made a lot of mistakes, and then he has to swallow any pride that he may have left and return and plead with his father to at least be taken back as a servant. And again, I'm sure there's elements of his perspective that we can identify with at some point in our lives. Then secondly, we've got the embracing father. Now, if you thought that the father's perspective and his approach would be one that you would take, well, you probably don't need to listen to the rest of this message because you have arrived. You are full of grace in a way that most of us will probably really struggle to ever achieve with the best of intentions. You are a very spiritual person. I am very impressed. But I think in reality, even the most graceful of us listening still probably identify most with the third character in this story. And that's the disgruntled brother. You know, the dedicated, hardworking, committed person who shows up every week. And, you know, that's not the negative part of the brother's character. But the problem comes when he compares himself to his brother and the treatment that his brother gets versus the treatment that he has got. He thinks, I've been here all along. I've been working hard. And then my brother comes back after making so many mistakes and he gets better treatment than me. You know, he doesn't deserve this. I deserve this. I think there's maybe some similarities in the negative way of thinking that we could get into as well. Like, so-and-so did that in lockdown and now they get to waltz back into church like nothing has happened and get a loving welcome despite what they did. Oh, I heard so-and-so had an affair in lockdown and then they still allow them to be on welcome team. That person didn't help church, like make church happen in lockdown at all. And now they're back in here on team, like they've been part of it the whole time and everyone loves them and it's all so great. Well, I heard that person frequently broke the rules in lockdown. I think they even put posts on Facebook about being an anti-vaxxer. And we've been so good as a church trying to keep people safe. And now they're back here, waltzing in. I don't think we should have let them in the doors. No, I think that might be all of those things may be a bit extreme, but it's possible. And I bet at the very least, you might even had a fleeting thought of, I'm not really sure that was a good idea. I'm not really sure that I approve of what that person said or did. And maybe even if you had that thought, you might harbor a little bit of resentment that people maybe seem to have overlooked it, or maybe even worse, that you feel that they've had better treatment than you. You know, if you haven't experienced this yet, great, but stick around long enough and I'm sure that it will happen. Again, inspiring message for you all this morning, but I think we need to be realistic because this kind of thing will happen because we are all human. At some point, we may well resent someone else in the community based on the treatment they've had, and that is where the problem starts. So how do we deal with others that we don't agree with? How do we maintain a unified community? How do we stand side by side or work together with those we have taken offense from? How do we interact with people when we don't like what they've said or done in this last year? We need to be more like the father of the prodigal son. And I have two things that the father did that I think we can try and replicate. And the first one is this. He treated the prodigal son based on who he was, not what he had done. He treated the prodigal son based on who he was, not what he had done. You know, I think it's very dangerous if we all get into this way of thinking that just because someone says or does something that we perceive to be wrong, that they as a person are wrong. And I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important. I think it's very dangerous if we get into the way of thinking that just because someone says or does something that we perceive as wrong, that they as a person are wrong. That is just not true. Let's remember that our value as human beings is not based on what we do, but based on who we are, which is a child of God. We need to also have more faith in God's redeeming power as well, right? Rather than just writing people off. You know, the grace of God can soften even the hardest and most corrupt heart. No one is irredeemable. Everyone deserves another chance. Now, I understand why we might be wary of this, though. You know, we might not want to be associated with people who we don't agree with. We might not want to be sort of risk being tarred with the same brush. We might not want to risk being cancelled, like with them, having other people presume that because we associate them or haven't cut them out of our lives, that maybe we must agree with them or we endorse what they're saying and doing. and therefore we might feel like we are in the wrong as well. But surely it's more of a powerful message to say, okay, yeah, I don't agree with that person on this issue, or I don't choose to live my life the same way as them, or even actually I do think what they did was wrong in that instance. But that doesn't mean that I still don't think they're a human being worthy of kindness. And how about we should decide, I'm going to treat others as I would like to be treated. Now that is radical. And I can sense people still thinking right now that, Helena, there is a line though, right? You know, murderers, extremists, racists, surely not them. You know, on the whole, yes, you know, that's not really our everyday situation. These are very extreme situations. It's not representative of what things are like in our community. But I'm not discounting it. You know, for those of you who know the Bible in a bit more detail, let's not forget that Paul, the person who wrote a significant proportion of the New Testament of the Bible, one of the most influential and significant people in the history of Christianity, used to go by the name Saul and murder Christians. No one is irredeemable. But, and this is the real kicker, people stand much less a chance of changing for the better if we reject them based on what they say and do. People stand much less chance of changing for the better if we reject them based on what they say and do. I'm not saying don't have boundaries either. I'm not saying we don't stand up for injustice or not have consequences for intolerable behavior. And my kind of example and reference point for this is at work. You know, as a doctor, I'm bound by a professional code to treat all people for their health problems, regardless of who they are and what they have done. But the most challenging times with this is when patients are abusive to our staff members. So what do we do in that situation? Do we tolerate patients shouting or abusing us or swearing or threatening our staff? No. If it happens, we give them a warning, but we still treat them for their medical needs. If it happens again, we give them a written warning and clear terms that they will be removed from our register if they continue to act in this way, but we still treat them. See, there are consequences, but equally, we still have grace and forgiveness for people and treat their needs. So let's be more like the Father and treat people based on who they are, a child of God, not based on what they have said or done. And the second characteristic of the father of the prodigal son that we can replicate, I think, is that he demonstrated grace. He demonstrated grace. See, not only did he forgive the son of what must have been a huge offense in taking his inheritance and then squandering it, he threw him a party. He did not just give him what he deserved. He didn't just not give him what he deserved, but he'd probably been not even welcomed back, or at the very least being made to work as a servant in the household to try and pay back everything that he'd spent. But instead, he lavished the best on him and celebrated the fact that he was home. This is a great representation of grace. And again, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be consequences for clear wrongdoing, but I think our natural inclination is probably to be a bit too punitive, where we could probably err more on the side of grace. Yes, that person maybe said or did something in lockdown that you don't agree with, but what good is it to hold it against them anyway? And who are we even to judge? Let's be full of grace and help people move forward into a more positive future that God has for them. You know, ultimately, the father in this story represents the heart of God. It shows how much he rejoices when someone decides that they want a relationship with him. It shows no matter what anyone has said and done, the joy and the celebration of someone believing in him is the same. And it gives us an idea of the party that goes on in heaven when one person connects with God, no matter who that person is or what they have done. So why be more like the Father? Because we have all been the prodigal son. We have all made mistakes. We have all said or done things that we regret. We have all intentionally or unintentionally hurt or offended other people. We have all fallen short of what is best for us. We have all said or done things that are unbecoming of us. But we all have had grace and forgiveness from our Heavenly Father for this. You know, Ephesians 4:32 says, "Be kind and compassionate, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." Be kind and compassionate, forgiving one another. I was trying to remember it. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Memorize this verse. Write it down, stick it down up in places where you see it regularly, because this is what sums up exactly the approach we are going to need as the world opens up more and we come back together as a community on site. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. As I draw things to a close this morning, I'm struck by the reality that there were probably more brothers and fathers of this story watching, but not enough prodigal sons. See, we need to go out and reach out to those who are a long way off. Run to them and bring them home. Every time I practice this, I get emotional. You can do this, Helena, come on. We've all been through so much in this last year. For some people, it has meant bad decisions, regrettable actions, words they cannot take back. Now, more than ever, though, these people need to know and understand the love and the forgiveness of their Creator. Oh, now I want to collect myself for this bit because it's really good. They are not going to find God in our judgment. They are not going to find God in our criticism. And they are not going to find God in our attempts at correction. They are going to find him through us showing them God's compassion and love for them, and through acceptance into this community, no matter what they have said or done. So as we return to life that looks a bit more normal, as we return to gathering on site and getting a whole lot more of this community together in person, in one place, let's make sure we put aside our offense, our prejudices, and reach out to those around us who need to be embraced and welcomed home.